In a forgotten valley between dry mountains and endless skies, there lived a shepherd who owned nothing but a small flock of sheep, a modest clay house, and a quiet faith that did not shout but endured. He was not known for wealth. He was not known for influence. But in his village, people knew him as a man who never complained. His name was Salman. Every morning before sunrise, while the horizon still held the last shade of night, Salman would rise from his thin mattress, wash his face with cold water drawn from a clay jar, and whisper a prayer under his breath. He would step outside into the pale blue silence, where his sheep waited behind a wooden fence he had built with his own hands. The land was harsh but honest. It gave only to those who worked without expectation. Salman understood that. He walked his flock across rocky hills and dry plains where patches of green grass survived stubbornly between stones. The wind there carried dust and memory. Some days it was gentle. Some days it bit at the skin like tiny knives. But Salman never cursed the wind. In the evenings he returned home to his wife, Amina, whose presence softened the rough edges of his life. She had patient eyes and steady hands. Their small house was poor but it was warm. A clay stove, 2 rugs, a wooden bowl carved by Salman years ago. Nothing unnecessary, nothing excessive. They did not speak often about dreams. They simply lived. One year the sky changed. Clouds gathered thick and heavy at the end of summer. At first the villagers rejoiced. Rain meant life. Rain meant grass. Rain meant milk. But the rain did not stop. It poured for days without mercy. The dry earth, unaccustomed to abundance, could not absorb the sudden flood. The river that once flowed gently beyond the hills began to roar like a beast awakened from sleep. Salman tried to move his flock to higher ground. He shouted into the storm, his voice swallowed by thunder. The sheep panicked. Mud swallowed their hooves. The sky cracked open again and again. By the time the storm ended, half his flock was gone. Some had drowned. Others had scattered into the wilderness. He stood in the aftermath, soaked and trembling, watching the river carry away the remains of what had once been his security. A neighbor approached cautiously and said, "This is a curse, Salman. You have been struck by misfortune." Salman wiped rain from his beard and replied quietly, "It is not a curse. It is a test." He gathered the remaining sheep and returned home. Amina saw the emptiness in his eyes before he spoke. She counted the flock silently and understood. That night they ate less than usual. The following weeks were heavy. With fewer sheep came less milk. With less milk came fewer coins in the market. Winter approached and the air sharpened with warning. Then, as if the loss had not been enough, disease spread among the remaining animals. It began with one sheep refusing to eat. Then another. Soon, thin bodies lay motionless beside the fence. Salman buried them himself. By the end of winter, only 3 sheep remained. 3. From 30 to 3. Villagers shook their heads when they saw him walking behind such a pitiful sight. "Why does God do this to you?" one man asked. Salman answered, "God does not do this to break me. He does it to shape me." But even faith can grow tired inside a human chest. One night, as wind pressed against the thin walls of their home, Amina spoke words she had never dared to say before. "How long will we endure this?" she asked softly. "We have nothing left." Salman looked at the dim flame of their oil lamp. "We still have breath," he said. Spring came slowly, uncertainly. Salman worked harder than before. He offered labor in exchange for grain. He repaired fences for neighbors. He carried heavy stones to help rebuild a damaged bridge near the village. Some pitied him. Some admired him. Others avoided him, afraid misfortune might be contagious. Then came the fire. It began in the late afternoon while Salman was out in the hills. Amina had stepped outside briefly to collect water from the well. No one knew how the spark started. Some said it was a cooking ember carried by wind. Others said lightning had struck earlier and left heat beneath the roof. By the time villagers noticed smoke rising, the clay house was already devoured. Amina tried to rush inside to save what little they owned, but strong hands pulled her back. When Salman returned, he saw only blackened walls and rising smoke. Everything they owned, every bowl, every blanket, every memory carved into wood, was gone. Amina sat on the ground, her face covered in ash. Salman stood still for a long time. A neighbor waited for him to scream. Another waited for him to curse. Instead, Salman walked forward, placed his hand gently on Amina's shoulder and said, "We were not created for walls." That night, they slept beneath the open sky. Days passed. Something inside Amina began to change. The weight of loss settled differently in her heart. She watched other families rebuilding, laughing, continuing. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, she said, "I am tired, Salman." He did not answer immediately. "I am tired of tests," she continued. "Tired of patience. Tired of hunger. I want stability. I want certainty." Salman nodded slowly. "I cannot promise certainty," he said. "I can only promise endurance." Amina's eyes filled with tears, not of anger but of exhaustion. Weeks later she made her decision. "I will go to my brother's village," she said quietly. "Perhaps there life will be kinder." Salman did not try to stop her. Love, he believed, was not possession. He helped her pack the little they had left. When she walked away at dawn, carrying a small bundle, she did not look back. For the first time in years, Salman stood completely alone. No flock. No house. No wife. Only sky. Only dust. Only silence. Villagers whispered that he was cursed. Some said he must have committed a hidden sin. Others said he was a fool for refusing to complain. Salman left the valley soon after. He took the 3 remaining sheep and began walking toward lands he had never seen before. The road was long and dry. Days blurred into one another. He slept beneath trees. He drank from streams when he found them. Sometimes he traded milk for bread in distant settlements. One afternoon, while resting near a crossroads, an old traveler approached on horseback. The traveler's beard was gray but well kept. His eyes were observant, almost piercing. He wore simple robes, but the horse beneath him was strong and noble. The traveler stopped and studied Salman. "You look like a man who has lost something," the traveler said. Salman smiled faintly. "Everyone has lost something." "What have you lost?" the traveler asked. "My flock. My home. My wife." "And you do not curse the heavens?" Salman looked up at the wide, indifferent sky. "If I curse the sky," he said, "will it lower itself to argue with me?" The traveler tilted his head slightly. "Most men would be broken." "Perhaps I am," Salman replied. "But broken wood can still burn." The traveler's eyes narrowed, not in suspicion but in interest. "Tell me," he said, "if tomorrow you lost even these 3 sheep, what would you say?" Salman gently touched the wool of the nearest animal. "I would say that tomorrow is not the end." The traveler studied him for a long moment. "Strange man," he murmured. "Not strange," Salman answered softly. "Just unwilling to curse." The wind moved between them, carrying dust and unspoken thoughts. The traveler finally nodded. "Very well," he said. "Walk your road." Salman rose, gathered his sheep, and continued into the distance. Behind him, the traveler remained still, watching. As the shepherd's figure grew smaller against the horizon, the traveler whispered to himself, "Let us see how far your endurance truly goes." And somewhere beyond the mountains, another storm was already forming. The road did not grow kinder after that meeting. Salman walked for days beneath a sky that seemed endless and indifferent. The land beyond the valley was unfamiliar, wide plains that rolled like tired waves, broken only by clusters of thorn trees and distant hills that shimmered under heat. His 3 remaining sheep followed closely, thin but loyal. In a small settlement near the edge of a dry riverbed, Salman found temporary work. The villagers there were wary at first. A man with no home and no family is often treated as a question mark. But when they saw the way he worked, silently, steadily, without complaint, they allowed him to stay. He repaired broken fences. He cleared irrigation channels clogged with mud. He carried stones to strengthen a crumbling wall that protected the village well. At night, he slept in a corner of a barn offered by a farmer who had noticed the gentleness with which Salman handled animals. Weeks passed. Then one morning he awoke to a sound he had begun to fear. Coughing. One of the sheep lay on its side, struggling to breathe. By noon it was dead. The farmer who had given him shelter shook his head. "You carry misfortune with you," he said quietly. "Perhaps you should move on." Salman buried the sheep outside the village and left without protest. 2 sheep remained. He traveled east this time, toward greener lands he had heard mentioned by traders. The journey took him through narrow passes between rocky cliffs where wind whistled like distant voices. On the 4th day, bandits appeared. They emerged from behind boulders, faces wrapped in cloth, blades glinting under harsh sunlight. "Leave the animals and go," one of them said. Salman looked at his sheep, then at the men. "These are all I have." "Then you have enough," the bandit replied coldly. Salman could have fought. He was not weak. Years of labor had built strength into his arms and back. But he saw no victory in bloodshed. He untied the ropes from the sheep's necks and stepped back. The bandits took the animals and disappeared into the rocks. Now there were none. No flock. No house. No wife. No certainty. Only breath. For the first time since the losses began, Salman felt something shift inside him. Not anger, not despair, but a hollow quiet that echoed louder than grief. He walked alone. Without sheep to tend, without purpose defined by labor, he felt strangely weightless. He followed the path downward toward a river valley where fields of grain shimmered in the distance. In that valley stood a large town surrounded by stone walls. Smoke rose from chimneys. Merchants called out prices. Children ran through narrow streets. Salman entered quietly. He searched for work and found it quickly. The town's governor needed laborers to rebuild a collapsed warehouse near the river. Salman lifted timber beams heavier than most men could manage alone. His silence made people curious. "You never complain," one worker said. "Complaining builds nothing," Salman replied. Months passed. His hands hardened further. His beard grew longer, streaked now with threads of gray. Though he owned nothing, he began to gain something else, a reputation. "If you want the work done honestly, give it to the quiet man," people would say. One evening, as he carried water buckets from the river, he noticed a commotion near the marketplace. A wealthy merchant was shouting. "My caravan was robbed," the merchant cried. "Bandits attacked us beyond the cliffs. Everything is gone." Salman paused. The description of the location struck him. The same narrow pass. The same rocks. He approached slowly. "How many bandits?" Salman asked. The merchant eyed him suspiciously. "5. Maybe 6. Salman nodded slightly. "I have seen them," he said. The merchant's eyes widened. "Where?" Salman described the terrain in detail, the shape of the cliffs, the hidden alcove behind a split boulder. The merchant quickly gathered guards and rode toward the pass. They returned at dawn with stolen goods recovered and bandits captured. Word spread rapidly. The governor summoned Salman. "You knew where they were," the governor said carefully. "Why?" "Because they took my sheep," Salman answered simply. The governor studied him. "And you did nothing?" "I let them go." The governor frowned. "You are either a fool or a rare man." Salman did not respond. Days later, the governor offered him a position, overseeing storage houses near the river, ensuring goods were accounted for and theft was prevented. Salman accepted. For the first time since leaving his valley, he stood in a position of responsibility. He slept in a small room near the warehouse. He ate regularly. He wore cleaner clothes provided by the town. But he did not change his habits. He still rose before sunrise. He still whispered his quiet prayers. He still avoided unnecessary words. One afternoon, as he inspected inventory, a familiar voice echoed behind him. "You have climbed from nothing to something again." Salman turned. The old traveler stood in the doorway, dust on his robes, the same noble horse tied outside. "You?" Salman said calmly. "Yes," the traveler replied. "I follow interesting roads." Salman inclined his head slightly. "Then you must be tired." The traveler smiled faintly. "Are you?" Salman considered the question. "No," he said. "Not tired." "Not angry?" the traveler pressed. "Anger is heavy," Salman answered. "I have carried enough weight." The traveler stepped closer, examining the warehouse, the orderly stacks of grain and cloth. "You lost everything," he said. "Yet you stand again." Salman shrugged lightly. "Standing is easier than cursing." The traveler's gaze sharpened. "Tell me something," he said. "If this town were to turn against you tomorrow, if all this were taken again, what would you say?" Salman looked out toward the river flowing steadily beyond the open door. "I would say the river still flows." The traveler narrowed his eyes. "And if the river dried?" Salman's voice remained steady. "Then I would walk the riverbed." Silence settled between them. The traveler studied him as if measuring the depth of something unseen. "You are either deeply wise," he said slowly, "or deeply unaware of how cruel the world can be." Salman met his gaze without challenge. "I am aware," he said quietly. "Cruelty is loud. Endurance is quiet." The traveler mounted his horse once more. "We will meet again," he said. Salman watched him ride away. Seasons changed. Under Salman's supervision, the warehouses prospered. Theft decreased. Trade increased. The governor grew to trust him more each month. Then disaster struck again, not in the form of storm or fire but in politics. A neighboring ruler accused the town of withholding trade payments. Tension rose quickly. Soldiers gathered beyond the valley. War came like a shadow at dawn. The town was not prepared. Within days, fighting broke through the outer gates. Warehouses were looted. Fire spread. Salman tried to organize workers to move supplies, but chaos swallowed order. He saw men fall in the streets. He saw smoke consume buildings he had guarded carefully for months. By nightfall, the governor had fled. The town surrendered. The new ruling forces rounded up men connected to administration and trade. Salman was among them. Bound and marched with others, he felt rope tighten around his wrists. One prisoner beside him wept openly. "Why does this happen?" the man cried. "We had stability. We had success." Salman looked ahead at the soldiers' backs. "Stability moves," he said softly. They were taken to a distant city and thrown into a stone prison beneath the ruler's palace. Darkness closed in. Days blurred in cold confinement. Bread was scarce. Water tasted of rust. For the first time in years, Salman felt true physical weakness. He leaned against damp stone and closed his eyes. In the darkness, a voice echoed from memory. "If tomorrow you lost even these 3 sheep, what would you say?" He almost smiled. "Tomorrow is not the end," he whispered. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. A torch flickered near the bars. And behind the flame stood the old traveler once again. The torchlight flickered against the damp stone walls, casting long, trembling shadows across the prison corridor. Salman slowly rose to his feet as the old traveler stepped closer to the iron bars. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The traveler studied him carefully. Salman's clothes were torn. His face was thinner. His wrists were bruised from rope. Yet his eyes remained steady. "So," the traveler said at last, his voice echoing softly in the narrow passage, "you have fallen again." Salman gave a faint nod. "It would seem so. You lost your valley. You lost your flock. You lost your wife. You lost your position. And now you sit in chains." "Yes. And still," the traveler continued, leaning slightly closer, "you do not curse?" Salman looked at the iron bars between them. "If I curse," he said calmly, "will these bars dissolve?" The traveler's lips curved slightly, though not in mockery. "You surprise me, shepherd." "I am no longer a shepherd." The traveler raised an eyebrow. "What are you then?" Salman thought for a moment. "A man who is still breathing." Silence stretched between them again. Around them, other prisoners shifted and coughed. Some stared at the strange visitor. Others remained curled in hopelessness. The traveler straightened. "Tomorrow," he said, "you will be brought before the ruler of this city." Salman did not react. "You understand what that may mean?" "It may mean death," Salman replied. "And if it does?" Salman's voice remained level. "Then that too will pass." The traveler's eyes narrowed slightly, as if testing whether the words were hollow or rooted deep. "You are either the strongest man I have met," he said slowly, "or the most naive." "Perhaps both," Salman answered. The traveler turned to leave, then paused. "If you are asked tomorrow to defend your life, what will you say?" Salman glanced at the torch flame. "I will say what is true." "And if truth costs you your head?" Salman's expression did not shift. "Then I will bow to it." The traveler walked away, torchlight fading into darkness. The next morning, chains were removed from Salman's wrists, though guards still surrounded him. He was led through tall stone corridors into a grand hall illuminated by hanging lamps and sunlight streaming from high windows. At the far end sat the ruler of the conquered city, a stern-faced man dressed in embroidered robes, surrounded by advisors and soldiers. Salman was pushed forward. "You served the former governor," the ruler said, his voice controlled but sharp. "You managed trade and supplies." "I did," Salman replied. "You understand that those loyal to the previous authority are often considered threats." "I understand." The ruler leaned forward slightly. "Why should I not execute you?" The hall fell silent. Salman looked around the chamber, at the polished floors, at the armed guards, at the high ceiling above him. "Because I serve order," he said quietly. Murmurs rippled through the advisors. "Order?" the ruler repeated. "Yes," Salman continued. "I guarded goods so they would not be stolen. I accounted for trade so it would be fair. I worked before dawn and after sunset so others could eat. And if I appoint someone else to do this?" Salman met his gaze steadily. "Then I will serve him." A few advisors scoffed. "You would serve the man who conquered your city?" one asked. Salman nodded slightly. "Cities change hands. Hunger does not." The ruler leaned back in his chair. "You speak boldly for a prisoner." "I speak plainly." The ruler studied him for a long moment. "Tell me," he said, "when the town fell and you were captured, did you curse me?" "No." "Why not?" Salman answered without hesitation. Because you are a man. The ruler's eyes flickered with interest. And men are not gods. A faint smile touched the ruler's face. You believe your fate is not in my hands? I believe my breath is not. The hall fell silent again. The ruler rose slowly from his seat and descended the steps toward Salman. He stopped just a few feet away. If I spare you, he said, and place you in charge of my storage houses, if I raise you again, what will you say? Salman's answer came as steadily as ever. I will say that this moment is not permanent. The ruler's gaze sharpened. And if I cut you down tomorrow? Then that moment would not be permanent either. Something shifted in the ruler's expression. Not anger, not irritation, but recognition. He turned toward his advisors. Release him, he commanded. Gasps moved through the chamber. He will oversee the grain stores. If he lies, if he steals, if he betrays us, then I will personally see his head removed. Salman bowed his head once. Thank you. As guards removed his restraints fully, a voice echoed softly from the far end of the hall. Interesting. Salman turned. The old traveler stood near a column, no longer in simple robes. His posture was different now, straighter, commanding. The guards did not question his presence. Salman's eyes lingered on him briefly, but he said nothing. Months passed. Under Salman's supervision, the ruler's storage houses became models of efficiency. Grain shortages decreased. Distribution became fairer. Corruption within the system quietly disappeared. The ruler began inviting Salman to private councils. You see patterns others miss, the ruler once said. I watch, Salman replied. Most men react. You observe. I have learned that reaction is expensive. Years moved forward. The ruler aged. Whispers of succession began. The old traveler continued appearing occasionally, sometimes in markets, sometimes in palace gardens, always watching, never intervening. One evening, as Salman walked along the palace balcony overlooking the city, the traveler joined him. You have climbed high, the traveler said. Salman looked over the lights below. I have stood in many places. Do you know who I am? The traveler asked suddenly. Salman did not turn his head. Yes. The traveler smiled faintly. And? You test men. And what have I learned about you? That I do not curse. The traveler's expression grew serious. I have followed you from your valley, he said. From your storm. From your fire. From your prison. I know. And you never broke. Salman finally turned to face him fully. I bent, he said. Many times. But bending is not breaking. The traveler's eyes softened slightly. The ruler has no heir, he said quietly. Salman remained silent. He seeks someone who understands loss, the traveler continued. Someone who will not be intoxicated by power. Salman exhaled slowly. Power is louder than storms, he said. I have heard enough noise. The traveler studied him one final time. Tomorrow, he said, your life will change again. The following day, the ruler summoned Salman publicly. Before the court, he declared that Salman would become his chief advisor and, upon his death, guardian of the throne until a successor was chosen. Shock spread through the hall. Some opposed the decision. Others accepted it reluctantly. Salman accepted it quietly. Years later, when the ruler finally passed, the responsibility fell fully upon him. He did not sit on the throne immediately. He stood beside it. When urged to take the seat, he said, the seat does not change the man. But eventually he sat. Not as a conqueror. Not as a dreamer. But as a man who had walked through storms without cursing them. The kingdom prospered under his measured leadership. Taxes were balanced. Justice was calm but firm. Soldiers were restrained from unnecessary cruelty. And yet, one night, as Salman stood alone beneath the stars above the palace courtyard, the old traveler approached him one last time. You have been shepherd, prisoner, servant, and now ruler, the traveler said. Tell me, after all these years, what remains? Salman looked up at the sky he had once cursed silently in temptation but never allowed. What remains? He repeated softly. Yes. What does not pass? Salman closed his eyes briefly. Moments pass. Wealth passes. Power passes. Grief passes. Even joy passes. And only what is written beyond this life remains. The traveler's gaze held his for a long, steady breath. Then you have understood. The traveler stepped back into shadow. And for the first time in many years, Salman allowed himself a single quiet tear, not of sorrow, not of relief, but of clarity. He had lost everything more than once. He had gained everything more than once. And in the end, he understood that both loss and gain were travelers passing through the same door. Above him, the night sky stretched vast and silent. And somewhere beyond sight, the tests were finally complete.